What happens when two comedians sit down for what should be a lighthearted interview? But one question ignites a powder keg that explodes into the most intense confrontation late-night television has ever witnessed. Tonight, we're breaking down the moment Tim Allen walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage. And what started as playful banter turned into a fiery exchange that ended with security being called. This is the interview that had everyone talking. And you need to hear every single word that was said. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on, because this one is going to divide people. Let's get into it. The applause was thunderous as Tim Allen walked onto the set, waving to the audience with that signature confident smile. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, extending his hand for a shake that seemed warm enough, though anyone paying close attention might have noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. They'd never been particularly close in the industry. But this was supposed to be professional, promotional, just another night of late-night comedy. Tim Allen, everybody, Jimmy said, gesturing for him to take a seat. Great to have you here, man. It's been a while. Tim settled into the chair, adjusting his jacket. Yeah, it has. Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Nice to be back on late night. So, you've got the new project coming out, Jimmy said, glancing at his cards. But before we get into that, I got to ask because everyone's been wondering. You've been pretty vocal lately about a lot of things. Social media, interviews, podcasts. You've got opinions, and you're not shy about sharing them. The audience chuckled, but there was an edge to it. Tim's smile remained, but his eyes sharpened just a fraction. Well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we do, right? We're comedians. We observe. We comment. You do it every night. Sure. Jimmy nodded, leaning back in his chair. But there's commenting, and then there's, some of the stuff you've said that's gotten people pretty fired up. I mean, you had to know some of it would be controversial. Tim's jaw tightened slightly. Controversial to who exactly? Because I think what's happened is we've created this environment where if you don't say exactly what a certain group of people wants to hear, you're suddenly controversial. I'm just being honest. Okay. But honest about what, though? Jimmy pressed. And now the lightness in his voice was fading. Because some of the things you've said, Tim, they've upset a lot of people. Good people. People who watch this show. People who used to watch your shows. The audience went quiet. Tim leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. Jimmy, are you interviewing me or are you lecturing me? Because I came here to talk about my work, not to get a moral lesson from someone who makes Trump jokes for applause every single night. A collective gasp rippled through the studio. Jimmy's face flushed, and he set his cards down on the desk with a sharp tap. Whoa. Okay, so we're going there. That's fine. Let's go there. You think making jokes about the president is the same as what you've been doing? I think, Tim said, his voice rising, that you've built your entire show on a very specific political point of view, and you act like it's the only reasonable one. Meanwhile, half the country disagrees with you, and you just write them off as idiots. But when someone like me says something that doesn't fit your narrative, suddenly I'm the problem. Jimmy shook his head, his own frustration mounting. That's not what this is about, man. This is about you saying things that are hurtful, that are damaging. You've got a platform, and with that comes responsibility. Oh, here we go. Tim shot back, throwing his hands up. Responsibility? You mean the responsibility to think exactly like you do, to parrot the same talking points? I thought comedy was about pushing boundaries, about making people uncomfortable sometimes. Or does that only apply when you agree with the message? There's a difference between pushing boundaries and just being cruel, Jimmy said, his voice harder now. And some of the stuff you've said, Tim, it crosses a line. You know it does. Tim stood up, and the audience collectively held their breath. What line, Jimmy? The line you drew? Because I don't remember voting you the arbiter of what's acceptable. You sit here in your bubble, surrounded by people who think exactly like you do, and you've convinced yourself you're on the right side of everything. But you're not interested in dialogue. You're interested in compliance. Jimmy stood as well, his face red. That is not fair, and you know it. I have plenty of guests on this show, with different viewpoints. Really? Tim challenged. Name one person you've had on recently who actually challenged your worldview. One person who made you uncomfortable. Because from where I'm standing, This whole thing is just an echo chamber. You're on the show right now, Jimmy shot back. And you're clearly making me uncomfortable. Does that count? Yeah, because you brought me on here to ambush me, Tim said, his voice sharp. You didn't want a conversation. You wanted a confession. You wanted me to come out here and apologize for not thinking the way you want me to think. The tension in the room was suffocating. The audience didn't know whether to applaud, boo, or stay silent. Jimmy took a breath, trying to steady himself. Tim, I brought you on because I thought we could have an actual discussion. But if you're just going to accuse me of setting you up, then maybe this wasn't a good idea. Maybe it wasn't, Tim agreed coldly. Jimmy gestured toward the chair, his voice strained, but trying to maintain control. Okay, look, sit down. Let's try to have an actual conversation here. Can we do that? Tim remained standing for a moment, clearly debating whether to walk off right then and there. Finally, with visible reluctance, he sat back down, though his posture was rigid, defensive. Fine, let's have a conversation. But that means you actually listen instead of just waiting for your turn to tell me why I'm wrong. I do listen, Jimmy insisted, sitting as well. But Tim, when you say things that diminish other people's experiences, when you mock things that really matter to people, what am I supposed to do? Just nod and smile. What I'm supposed to do, Tim countered, is pretend that everything is offensive now. That we can't make jokes about anything without someone claiming they're a victim. Comedy is dying, Jimmy. And it's dying because people like you are so terrified of offending anyone that you've neutered the whole art form. Jimmy leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. That's such a cop-out, man. You can be funny without punching down. You can be edgy without being mean. Some of the best comedians out there right now are doing exactly that. Punching down, Tim repeated with a bitter laugh. That's the phrase everyone uses now, isn't it? As if there's some hierarchy we all agreed to, and I missed the memo. I make jokes about my observations, about absurdities I see in the world. If someone gets offended, that doesn't automatically mean I was wrong to say it. But who decides what's absurd? Jimmy pressed. Because to you, maybe it's absurd that people want to be called by certain pronouns, or that they care about representation, or that they're fighting for rights you've had your whole life. But to them, it's their existence. It's not absurd. It's their reality. Tim's eyes flashed. Now hold on. You're putting words in my mouth. I never said people don't have the right to live however they want. What I said is that I'm not going to be bullied into pretending that every single social movement is beyond criticism, that every cause is automatically righteous just because it's wrapped in the language of justice. Nobody's bullying you, Jimmy said, his voice rising again. You're one of the most successful people in this business. You've had hit shows, movies, you've made millions. You're not some victim being silenced. You have a platform bigger than most people could ever dream of. And yet here you are, Tim shot back, trying to shame me for using it. You can't have it both ways, Jimmy. Either I have the right to speak my mind, or I don't. And what you're really saying is I have the right to speak my mind as long as I say what you approve of. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Some looked uncomfortable, others were nodding along, and a few were clearly upset. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. This is exhausting, man. This whole victim mentality thing. You act like you're being persecuted for having an opinion, but what's really happening is people are responding to your opinion with their own. That's how free speech works. You say something, people react. You don't get to say whatever you want and then cry foul when people call you out. Call me out. Tim's voice went cold. Is that what you call this? Because what I'm experiencing right now feels a lot more like a public shaming than a call out. You invited me on your show under the pretense of promoting my work, and instead you've spent the entire time attacking my character. Jimmy shook his head firmly. I'm not attacking your character. I'm questioning your choices. There's a difference. And honestly, if you can't handle being questioned, then maybe you shouldn't be saying controversial things in the first place. There it is, Tim said, pointing at him. That's the threat, isn't it? Shut up or face the consequences. Say the approved things or get destroyed. That's not free speech, Jimmy. That's authoritarianism with a smile. Oh, come on, Jimmy said, his exasperation obvious. Authoritarianism? Really? You're comparing me asking you tough questions to authoritarianism. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself just fine, Tim replied. What I'm hearing from you is the same thing I hear from everyone in this town. Conform or be cast out. Agree or be labeled. And the thing is, you don't even see it. You think you're the good guy in this scenario. You think you're on the right side of history, standing up for the marginalized, fighting the good fight. But you're just another enforcer, Jimmy. You're just another person making sure nobody steps out of line. Jimmy's face was flushed with anger. Now, you know what, Tim? I think you're so caught up in this narrative that you're some kind of rebel, some truth teller, that you've lost sight of the actual impact your words have. Real people are affected by the things you say. Real communities feel attacked when you dismiss their struggles as political correctness or whatever buzzword you're using this week. And real people agree with me, Tim countered. Millions of them. But you don't care about those people, do you? Because they don't fit your worldview. They're not the right kind of victims. They don't have the right opinions, so they don't count. That's not true, Jimmy said. But his voice wavered slightly. Isn't it? Tim challenged. When's the last time you had someone on this show who spoke for those people? When's the last time you gave airtime to a perspective that didn't align with your politics? You talk about diversity, but you only mean a certain kind. Diversity of appearance, sure, but diversity of thought, that's where you draw the line. Jimmy stood up again, his patience clearly at its limit. You know what? I'm done. I'm done with this conversation. You came here with an agenda, and nothing I say is going to change your mind. You want to play the victim? Fine. You want to act like you're being silenced while you're literally on national television? Go ahead. But I don't have to sit here and facilitate it. Tim stood as well, his face hard. Finally, something we agree on. I don't need to be here. I thought maybe we could have an actual exchange of ideas. But you're not interested in that. You're interested in being right. And that's the problem with all of this. It's not about understanding anymore. It's about winning. Get off my stage, Jimmy said, his voice low and shaking with fury. Tim stared at Jimmy for a long moment, the silence in the studio so thick you could cut it with a knife. Excuse me, you heard me? Jimmy repeated, his voice steadier now, but still charged with anger. Get off my stage. This interview is over. Tim let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Your stage? That's interesting, Jimmy, because last I checked, this stage belongs to the network, the sponsors, and the audience. But sure, let's pretend it's your personal kingdom where you get to decide who's allowed to speak. I'm the host of this show, Jimmy fired back. And I have every right to end an interview when a guest is being disrespectful and turning this into a circus. Disrespectful? Tim's voice rose. I'm being disrespectful. You brought me here under false pretenses, ambushed me with accusations disguised as questions, and when I defended myself, suddenly I'm the bad guy. That's rich, Jimmy. That's really rich. The audience was shifting uncomfortably, some people pulling out their phones, clearly recording what was happening. Jimmy noticed and seemed to become more aware of just how badly this was spiraling. Look, Tim, I think we both need to take a breath here. This got out of hand. Oh, now you want to de-escalate, Tim said incredulously. Now that you've made your point. Now that you've painted me as the villain in front of your audience. Now you want to be reasonable. No, I don't think so. You wanted this conversation. So, let's finish it. Jimmy's jaw clenched. Fine, let's finish it. You want to know what I really think? I think you're scared. I think the world is changing and you don't like it because it doesn't center you anymore. It doesn't prioritize your comfort, your perspective, and instead of growing, instead of listening and learning, you've decided to dig your heels in and act like everyone else is crazy. Tim's face darkened. You don't know anything about what I'm scared of. You don't know anything about me, Jimmy. You know the version of me that fits your narrative. The out-of-touch conservative comedian who won't get with the program. But I've been doing this longer than you. I've seen trends come and go. I've watched comedy evolve and evolve. And what I'm watching now is an evolution. It's cowardice. Cowardice, Jimmy repeated flatly. Caring about other people is cowardice. No, Tim said sharply. Pretending to care so you can look good is cowardice. Virtue signaling while you live in your mansion and lecture everyone else about morality is cowardice. You want to talk about punching down? How about a millionaire talk show host telling working class people what they should think and how they should feel? How about that for punching down? Jimmy's face went pale, then flushed again. That is not what I do. It's exactly what you do, Tim insisted every single night. You sit here in your bubble, surrounded by writers who think like you, an audience that cheers for you, and you've convinced yourself that you're speaking truth to power. But you're the power, Jimmy. You, and everyone like you. You run this industry. You decide what's acceptable. And anyone who doesn't fall in line gets destroyed. If you feel destroyed, that's on you, Jimmy said coldly. Nobody forced you to say the things you said. Nobody made you double down when people expressed hurt. You made those choices. Own them. I do own them. Tim shot back. That's the difference between us. I stand by what I say, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs me. But you only say things that you know will get applause. You only take stances that are safe. You're not brave, Jimmy. You're calculating. The words hung in the air like a grenade. Jimmy's hands were shaking slightly. Whether from anger or adrenaline, it was hard to tell. You need to leave right now. This is done. I'm not going anywhere until I'm finished, Tim said, his voice hard as steel. You wanted to have this conversation on your terms, but now we're having it on mine. You want to talk about impact? Let's talk about the impact of creating a culture where people are afraid to speak their minds, where comedians have to run every joke through a political filter before they tell it, where one wrong word can end a career. That's the world you're helping to build, Jimmy, and you're proud of it. Jimmy's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but it was laced with fury. Get out now, or I'm calling security. Tim stared at him, and for a moment it seemed like he might refuse. The audience was frozen, watching this showdown with a mixture of shock and fascination. Finally, Tim took a step back, his expression one of disgusted resignation. You know what? I feel sorry for you. I really do. Because you actually believe you're doing the right thing. You think you're making the world better, but all you're doing is making it smaller, more afraid, more divided. Security, Jimmy called out, his voice cracking slightly. Two large men in black shirts began making their way onto the stage from the wings. Tim held up his hands, backing away. Don't worry, I'm leaving. But let me leave you with this, Jimmy. One day, the line you're drawing is going to move. One day you're going to say something or think something or believe something that doesn't align with whatever the new standard is. And when that happens, when you're the one being judged and found wanting, remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be so certain you were right. The security guards reached Tim's side, but he was already walking toward the exit on his own. Jimmy stood behind his desk, his chest heaving, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. A few people started applauding, but it was scattered and uncertain, quickly dying out. Tim reached the edge of the stage, then turned back one last time. And for the record, I came here in good faith. I came here thinking we could disagree like adults. But you couldn't handle that. You couldn't handle someone not bowing to your worldview. So yeah, maybe I am off your stage, but I'm not wrong. With that, he walked off, disappearing into the wings. The camera caught Jimmy's face, a complicated mix of anger, vindication, and something that might have been doubt. He looked at the audience, then at the camera, clearly struggling to find words. We'll be right back. He finally managed, and the show cut to commercial. The clip would be everywhere within hours. Social media would explode with opinions, think pieces, and hot takes. Some would say Tim was out of line, that he'd shown his true colors. Others would say he'd exposed the hypocrisy of late-night television, but everyone would be talking about it. Everyone would have an opinion, and that perhaps was the only thing both men might have agreed on. If they'd still been speaking. So, what do you think? Was Tim Allen right to push back the way he did, or did he cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe because we're going to keep breaking down the biggest moments in entertainment. And here's the question I want you to answer. Whose side are you on in this clash? Tim's or Jimmy's?